Anyway, we are now coming to the end of the conference, and I have the privilege of introducing the last speaker, not just for the day, but of the conference itself. And it is befitting that the last speaker is Vinita Srivatava, the current Executive Director of Heritage at the Railway Board, which doubles up as the Ministry of Railways of the Government of India. As in the case of Prashant Mishra, who was one of the speakers yesterday, I first knew Vinita as a trainee officer at the Indian Railways Institute of Mechanical and Electrical Engineering at Jamalpur in eastern India. Vinita is a mechanical engineer by qualification. She is also an alumnus of the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and the Chevening Research, Science and Innovation Program of the University of Oxford, UK. A member of the Indian Railways for a quarter of a century, Vinita has had diverse experience in other government ministries as well, apart from the railways. These include steel, heavy industry, public enterprises, and culture. Her varied interests include cultural and industrial heritage preservation, art, reading, and writing. As the incumbent Executive Director Heritage of the Railway Board, she is in the best position to tell us of the overall position of rail museums in the country, as virtually all of them are owned and managed by the Indian Railways. So it's over to you, Vinita.
Namaskar. Thank you so much for having me in your conference. After 25 years of railway service, and this certainly a seat at the table for me personally. If I share my screen,
please go ahead.
Sorry for that glitch. Reimagining rail museums. It's lovely to see all the presentations for the past 2 days, and so much of visual material of the Indian rail museums has already been shared that I risk the repetition of previous material if I go into the details of individual rail museums. And so I've kept this more of an ideas sharing kind of presentation. I hope you'll bear with me. It's a great time for museums in India. In the 2020 budget, the finance minister had announced 5 new on-site museums. In 2023, an epigraphy museum had come up in Hyderabad and is announced in Hyderabad, and also a 3,000 crore budget, of which 35% of the amount is earmarked for the Archaeological Survey of India to finance more and more museums. It means that the country is waking up to the importance of museums. The reasons are ranging from celebration of a space or the commemoration of an event or a personality, or simply public awareness. But certainly it's a good time for museums in India. The new museum in New Delhi, which is making waves, is the Pradhan Mantri Sangrahalaya. It's come up in the erstwhile estate of the first Prime Minister, but it tells the story of each and every Prime Minister who's graced this country in the highest office. And it is a completely immersive experience where you can walk in and perhaps take a picture with the Prime Minister of your choice. You can get a letter signed in original, perhaps by the signature of the PM of your choice, saying hello to you and telling you a favorite quotation, and a lot of other experiences which are certainly state-of-the-art when it comes to museums. And so we enter an era where everything, everywhere, all at once, is there in the world of museums for us. There's the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, which has cultural links of civilization telling the story of humanity. It has massive collections. It has super scale. It underlines global collections of the world we live in today. And then in New York, we have the small Museum, which is simply an elevator shaft converted with conceptual displays. Now, in this entire spectrum of museums and their design, where do we stand? Where do we want to be as rail museums collectively? The gentleman in the picture in front of you is Alexander Cunningham. And the reason he's famous is he's a British engineer who came down to India and finally was the first head of the Archaeological Survey of India. Many may know that the Public Works Department of the colonial state of the British Raj was called the PWD for roads, canals, and railways. So it was not just one separate department in the beginning, it was a part of a mapping of the geopolitical entity of India by a very colonial gaze. And it's important to read that entry from 1872-73 in an ASI report. The idea of the extent of ruined brick mounds of Harappa may be formed from the fact that they have more than sufficed to furnish brick ballast for 100 miles of the Lahore and Multan railway. Why is this significant? The ruins in Harappa are remnants of the oldest civilization which was in the geopolitical entity of India. And Lahore and Multan railway actually used those bricks as ballast. I find that very funny, but also a significant indicator of the debt we owe to restoring civilization as a railway. From that interesting nugget in history, I come down to the core of my presentation, which is why is it time to reimagine rail museums, particularly in India? And 2 days of deliberations have given a lot of information, ideas, and suggestions on this theme. What should be our message and role? Who are our audiences? What are the activities we must engage in, and who do we reach out to when we take on the role of rail museums? Do we have unique messages, very local, very event specific, or do we have a synthesis of community information all compiled into one little display? So the pictures you can see are one at Kakori, which was the pre-independence site for the Kakori train action, which is perhaps very significant as the first rebellion against the economic might of railway, treasury, and its movement through the Indian geography. And Malgudi, which I believe Aparna ma'am's part of the audience. So it celebrates the cartoonist and author who was born in Malgudi and spent his childhood there. And the site museum celebrates other beautiful things about the locale. There are questions of real estate, of how we fund museums, what are the manpower resources we enjoy, what are the expectations of people from rail museums, how do we sustain them? But most of all, I think where we search for answers is when we ask ourselves the question, who is the audience for a rail museum in India? And who is not? You see, if we start thinking about this, as I have been thinking for the last 2.5 years of my tenure as ED Heritage, I ask myself, why isn't there a rickshaw museum or perhaps a bus museum? And why railway museums? And who is not interested or invested or involved in rail heritage? And all that questioning leads to an existential crisis sometimes, but it also gives a lot of answers. The National Rail Museum at Chanakyapuri, we will complete 50 years of our existence very soon. We are at the eve of a significant redevelopment. The real estate is amazingly located and certainly in the eye of a lot of people, but it's not us alone. There are over 30 museums and galleries dotted all across the Indian Railway network. And when we think and plan for them, we must think it in the entirety of it all. So what's missing? Holistic narratives, the story of railroads in India, parallel events that involve all our rail museums and galleries, archives and research that allow enthusiasts, authors, event planners to put together a set of themes and ideas that resonate across a large section of people. We need virtual guides. We have a very preliminary QR code-based guide, which not many people use. Many immersive experiences that allow a visitor to experience an exhibit in more than one way. Certainly conservation and restoration, and all the brickbats I get here, I take in the right spirit, because our conservation is not as excellent as I might like. The efforts are on to improve that. So what is the way to move forward, and what has been missing in all these, someone's been praising all the bright, handsome, young, brilliant directors which the Rail Museum has had. But there have been gaps where perhaps a very holistic way of thinking about museums as living communities and making all the right connections has been missing. We don't want to celebrate just nostalgia. We want events, we want involvement. I think a museum has to foster continued interest in train travel. And India is losing that in the next generation. We have to do a lot to continue to foster interest when air traffic, especially in passenger transport, is a constant, persistent threat. We have to talk about heritage and modernity. Can't just narrate the past and draw a blank when it comes to telling the story of what the future of railways will be in India. We've got to tackle the story of all trains, from the oldest trams to the metro systems to the monorail and the futuristic bullet train. We must tell the story of all technologies, not just rolling stock, all tractions, all types of signaling, the track, the bridges, the most challenging projects of tunneling. It has to celebrate everything that's great about the railway. I think railways in India means being connected and moving forward. And that powerful statement about temples of transport from Bob's amazing presentation really stays in the mind. All perspectives have to be there. We haven't had state-of-the-art technology for reasons which were partly cultural, partly historic. But the state-of-the-art, not being state-of-the-art doesn't mean that you can't celebrate the arts. You can treat locomotives and rolling stock as cultural assets, very rightly said. You can analyze social impacts. You can celebrate the arts. If you can have Christmas celebrations in a museum in somewhere in the West, why can't you celebrate all the other festivals that fall? You can certainly go very deep into the economics of railways in India, understand how redistribution, how preventing inequity, how all of that actually impacted society. No railway perhaps can exist without connecting with the broader world at some point. International connections are there even with the Indian Railways, with our neighbors, with Britain and America. And all of these international connections should also be showcased and screened as part of our collection. How we do it with objects, with descriptive media, is something to think about. But this is what I feel is missing. Most importantly, the visitor has to be at the center of my museum. If I feel that the Indian Railways is the pride of India, and I feel that the Indian Railways has to show that it's proud of belonging to India, then I have to put a message that really goes out with the visitor after he concludes his visit, which says that the rail is a continuing, a sustainable transport of choice. If I'm able to even swerve the visitor by a few degrees towards that opinion, I think I've justified being a museum of the Indian Railways in the national capital or elsewhere. And I like to think about this as a sort of a secret recording, which I put at the exit gate of my museum. So I put in a recorder there and I try to record the voices of the visitors as they leave. I mean, if they say, oh, it was horrible, or it was too hot, or there wasn't enough services, fine. But I'd love to hear if somebody, while leaving the museum, was saying it was fun, and probably the dad or the mom, not the kid, would say, I learned something new today. And the exegate recording is, I think, for all museum curators who are maybe listening in today, whether it's a small museum in maybe Adra or Tinsukia or the large National Rail Museum, try to imagine what that recorder will say and try to change the context of the museum that you manage, and it will go a long way. So rail transport has to have extended themes, particularly in the Indian context. It must tackle the culture, the geography, the history, and the futures of railways in India. A lot of new museums like the Kalinga in Bhubaneswar has done that very successfully, and my commendations. Those who came before and could simply be collections of older bungalows or rolling stock should add to the intangible elements of those museums. And we provide not only resources, but archival material. Our archives are being digitized as we speak. And there is no dearth of information or visuals to tell a story effectively. I'd recommend anyone listening to look at this book, Indian Railways as Purveyors of Destiny. I think it's by Professor Arup Chatterjee. And it really tackles every theme from cinema to how railway features in song and even cuisine. And it's an illuminating read. So the role of enthusiasts. So my presentation ends with a bit of homework for everyone listening in who sincerely wants to do something about changing rail museums in India. Thought leadership, such as provided by this presentation, these 2 days of presentations. A digital presence and a networked future. Professor Manikutty has been so kind to suggest the bot. He taught me in IIM Ahmedabad, and the elective on Mahatma Gandhi stays till today. So thank you, sir, for that input. I promise you will work very sincerely on that. Continuous engagement with diverse audiences. Today, my teenager kids spent more time in gaming. And I think one visit to the Rail Museum doesn't really evoke an interest in a second or a follow-on visit. So how do we use our spaces better? Can we have book launches? Can we have conferences? Can we have RES talks or tech meets? We have lovely event spaces. How can we use them better? We do want to experiment with new formats because webinars are quite boring and COVID underlined the isolation. I'd like to share here that during COVID, our restaurant was used to prepare food packets and distribute them to stranded workers. We had e-picnics online for those students who couldn't make it to the museum. And it taught us a lot as a team, as rail museums across the country. The pandemic years were difficult, but held a lot of learning. We do need to explore newer formats of museums engaging with its audience. And journeys and placemaking, another thing that I believe that enthusiasts can do a lot about. Journeys documented with photographs like Apurv ji does and Sanjay ji does for the KSR, beautiful photographs which inspired the painter in me. Placemaking is just adding intangibles to a place which is already significant by virtue of the location. But when you add activities to it, when you make it a destination for certain kinds of events, then journeys and placemaking can be something which enthusiasts can do most effectively. Our recent collaborations, please follow us on Facebook, on Insta, and our website of the Rail Museum. We've collaborated with the School of Planning and Architecture for ideas to redesign our spaces. The young students have come up with brilliant ideas, some of them rather wild, like taking the museum underground, but others which are really very sensible and sensitive. We have an ongoing Kiran Nadar Museum of Art pop-up for pop art in South Asia, where the children can color line drawings of steam locomotives. I think you'll see very interesting reels on Insta. The National Center of Science Museums is helping us plan science education and outreach, which could cover everything from internal combustion engines to steam technology and so on. There are a host of organizations, including the RES, which helps us to build capacity because our teams are drawn from the railway cadres, and they're not necessarily museologists or conservation experts or even art historians. So it's important to build capacity there, to have archives that can answer questions that are raised, and have a body of publishing which establishes us in the academic community as well. We've reached out to Sahapedia and others for organizing heritage walks from time to time, not only in Delhi, but in other railway locations across the country. And schools and universities are slowly responding to the NRM as a safe space for volunteering. We hope that a lot of good things will result from these collaborations. The road ahead: redesign the museum experience, retell the stories through diverse media, refresh the content and the perspectives, and reorganize collection and themes. These, if I can say, would be the 4 pillars of our efforts as we go forward. NRM Chanakyapuri cannot exist in isolation, but must be the first among equals of all the Indian rail museums and galleries. We have institutional resources for archives, pictures, and books. I'd welcome everyone to take advantage of it. I know that Vinu Mathurji has already used some pictures of us for his brilliant book on the architecture of railway buildings in India. And I hope many more authors will do that. We'd like your inputs on services that rail museums can offer, not just as a place to visit, but as institutions in the community and society. Thank you, and I'd like to take questions if there are any.
Thank you, Vinita. That was a good overall picture of what is happening now and what can be done in the future. We don't really have any questions, but we have one comment, which was from Pradeep, who said that Mr. Vora's presentation answered most of the questions you asked as to what should be the audience, what can be done, etc., etc. But we have a recording of Mr. Vora's presentation, and we'll certainly bring it to your notice.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sushma Singh would like to say a few words.
Hi, Vinita. Hi, everybody. Jail, you'll have to get up.
Thank you for unseating him, ma'am.
So, yeah, I've been part of the conference the last 2 days, yesterday and today, and I've been enjoying it. As I'm going to speak as an educationist right now, okay? I help students get admissions, etc. And what am I seeing? We're going on talking about, yes, the kids we know generally are the ones who are used to aeroplanes and they only want to go by fast cars. But we are forgetting that our larger population of kids are not these. If you go to the areas, where the children are going to government schools, smaller government schools, etc. They should be the ones who we need to pick up. They are the ones who travel by train. They are not looking at planes because they can't afford it, right? Maybe one day they can. But right now, they will be very good. And today, if you look at the number of scholarships that are available to kids, even kids from anywhere, for getting into better institutions in India or abroad, if we can add this into their profile, if we get them interested, get their minds a little more open, and so that they come here, and maybe we can add another school along with it. But I think one school by one school or two schools, not the city schools, not schools like Sri Ram or Heritage, or then those kids aren't interested. Right now they aren't. They will be if you tell them, oh, you'll get community service points. They will be if you tell them, oh, it will help to build your profile. So we can do that also, help building a profile. Yes, you've come and done this, or you learned this, or you did this on one day, you became, I think Mr. Singh and all had started it, training the guides. So that can be profile building. And if 4 come in and they get an advantage, so even these kids can be pulled in. What I'm saying is our population is vast. We're looking at the city kids. City kids today, unfortunately, have their minds are, as you said, into gaming, and the pandemic took them there even stronger, in a stronger way. So I feel that if we could do that, we'll be doing a double thing. We'll be bringing these kids out, teaching them more, exposing them in a better way, and maybe looking at some scholarships for them, some good certificates.
That's point is well taken, ma'am. And I don't have a large body of work to tell you about, but I can say that Sanjay One, which is located right next to the Rail Museum, is the area of underprivileged houses and societies. Earlier, we used to have unauthorized elements jumping over the wall of the Rail Museum and stealing, parts of the. But then we did an outreach where we invited those children free of cost, let them roam around our museum, and also sort of made it a high point of their connect with the museum. We've had fewer incidents of scrap parts being stolen, and the children are very happy with us. Please follow our Facebook. You'll see a lot of interactions happening.
Yeah, good, very good. That's what I'm saying. We've got enough. We've got the government school kids who'll be it'll be good for them also. Let's educate them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot for listening. Thanks.
Saurya, you had a question?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening. Thank you for the great presentation. 2 thoughts. One is, what is your opinion about introducing a heritage or best museum shield at the annual Railway Board Awards, which is held annually? And number 2 is, any steps being taken by the Heritage Directorate or the Railway Board to increase the revenue streams of existing museums? Because I feel that especially ticket prices, if you see, or the different services or facilities offered, the pricing is different and it's not always self-sustaining. So any new ideas to increase the revenue stream of museums?
Okay, the second point first. Revenue streams for rail museums in India are very clear: ticketing, event spaces, and a third is, I suppose, more outreach programs, but the ticketed price goes to external organizations. So basically revenues and renting out event spaces. We do not break even. In fact, we spend too much, and all our earnings are deposited into the coffers of the Northern Railway Delhi division. So every day a little cash box still goes and gets done. So first of all other museums, we are among the top 10 most visited sites, tourism sites in Delhi, which is a good thing, a great thing for a capital city. But we are perhaps the only setup which doesn't have its own autonomous society governing its activities. So we're part of the railways, from real estate to electricity bills to water to everything. And perhaps in the future, if it is decided that there is some autonomous society which governs it, or maybe we associate with the Culture Ministry for the National Science Museums Collective, we will have a sort of an institutional structure which supports this. Until such time, I really can't answer that question satisfactorily. And your first question about the shield, absolutely, the one doesn't exist right now. Maybe the RES can write in, and we have more than 30 rail museums and galleries, newer ones being added. If somebody does well, it's certainly good to recognize their efforts.
And ma'am, why I said about revenue stream is basically say an AME gets incentive for reducing failure of diesel shed, AOM gets incentive for increasing freight loading. So what I'm saying is officer is getting incentive for increasing revenue in the other aspects of Indian Railways related to train operation and maintenance. So if incentive is provided to the field level or junior or across all the levels, then I think the natural motivation would come, because everybody doesn't have natural inclination for heritage, right? But if you channelize it through some other fashion or other way, then I think the officers can be incentivized.
My understanding of motivation for running a good museum is that it's a strength of culture and heritage. It doesn't come from revenues. I don't think any great museum breaks even. But that's open to debate and information.
Okay, thank you.
There's an interesting observation by Manoj Pandey. He says, a thought-provoking presentation. I may add that railway archives are quite poor for a researcher on railway history. A beginning can be made by recording recent history in various rail museums. This is perhaps true. We do have history in many of our museums, but not to the extent that we should.
So the only quick comment I'll make there is that in Rupa Srinivasan ma'am's time, again, I think there should be more women looking after culture and heritage, because Aparna ji, Rupa ji, they've done great work. In her time, there was a sanction existing for digitizing rail archives in Trichy, where a wooden cupboard was found with excellent documents, and in the National Rail Museum, where all our archives are digitized. We've roped in CDAC, the Center for Development of Advanced Computing, to digitize all of this, to present it. We also have an ongoing MOU with the National Archives of India. Now, the problem here is, sir, that the National Archives also has a ton of documents, which predate that very interesting, very bitter period of pre-independence to post-partition, where nothing is available. Perhaps there's something in the India House in the UK, and there's a little bit in the Jodhpur and the Jaipur archives, but we don't have it here in Delhi. And they've put it aside, saying that if we get requests to download this digitally, we will convert it into digital format. But perhaps not enough people even approach the National Archives for digital information on railways. So as the interest grows, I think the availability will also grow, and accessioning is an important point for archives in general.
There's an interesting suggestion from Aparna Garg. She says the earnings from museums should go directly to the museum kitty.
Should go into a corpus, ma'am. Please help us achieve that. It should go into a corpus. If you see in Delhi, the India International Center, the Habitat, the IGNCA, where I served for a little bit, 25 crores corpus back in the 70s, and they've built into these fascinating institutions. Vinu Mathur sir's book was launched not in the Rail Museum, but the IIC, and I understand that they have better services in general, but they were able to build that because of a corpus supporting them. So certainly, if there's more and more acceptability for that idea, that museum revenues be whatever minimum they earn should feed back into an autonomous society or a corpus or something which helps it grow, and there are enough people wanting and watching a museum growing. I think that's it's promising for our future.
Anyway, thank you very much, Vinita. We come to the end of not just your talk, but the conference itself.